Welcome, Ness. Thank you for sitting down for this chat today. Before we get into, I guess, the more details, can you just tell us a little bit about you, where you're from, how you end up in Aotearoa today?
Yeah, sure. I was born in Worthing, which is on the south coast of England. So my mountain is Sisbury, which is a Neolithic hill fort on the South Downs. And that's where the ashes of both my mother and my father are scattered. And my mother fairly recently, actually, just been back to the UK for the first time in 4 years and scattered my mum's ashes up there too. I left school at 16. I haven't had a traditional academic career, went straight into work, but was quite a voicey, vociferous person in the workplace, shall we say. I joined the union, became a shop steward, and my union suggested that I might like to get some further education. So they funded me, and I was a lone parent at the time with a young son, to go to a trade union college in Oxford, called Ruskin, which is where really my interest in research got sparked. And Ruskin is predominantly about working with people to empower people to be able to do research or to change policy to make a difference to society. And straight after Ruskin, I got my first job as a research assistant in Wales, working in gerontology. And at the time, I had no idea what gerontology was, had to look that up really quickly, but discovered it was working with older people. Not only working with older people, but the team I was going to move to involved older people in that research. So older people were researchers. They decided what research questions were answered. So I took up my first post as a research assistant at Bangor University. That's right up in North Wales. My son was 3 at the time. So he went to a Welsh nursery school. So it's similar to New Zealand, bilingual country. And in North Wales, Welsh is first language. So my son at the age of 3 was initiated into speaking Welsh and is now a Welsh speaker. So we stayed there. I ended up running that research centre, the Centre for Social Policy Research and Development, as my mentor, Professor Claire Wenger, eventually retired, and I took over the centre and stayed there for 10 years. She was really groundbreaking, I think, in involving older people in research. At the time, gerontology itself, the study, of research with older people, was really in its infancy, but co-creation wasn't used at all. That term wasn't used. But to her, it made absolute sense that older people were involved in everything we did. And right from that instance, that's the way I've worked too, because it made absolute sense to me. You don't do any research with people without involving the people who that research affects. So up in North Wales, I developed a lot of my own research. I worked in rural and remote areas. I led a project with age concern Gwynedd and Moan, which is Gwynedd and Anglesey. And the older people decided what research questions would be asked, what methods would be used, did all the interviews, did all the surveys themselves, interpreted the data. But to me, the most surprising effect of that project was when older people themselves used what we found to make a difference. So bearing in mind, co-creation was in its infancy still at this time. The older women and older men that I was working with actually took what they'd found about living in rural, remote areas. Some of the issues and the issues they found are very similar to over here, that you have to travel a long way to get health services, or your health services are constrained in some way. You travel a long way for other facilities. For older people living down on, this was in the Llyn Peninsula, it was 2 hours to the nearest hospital. To get a specialist, they had to travel even further. And they were expected to arrive at appointments at certain times with no public transport to get them there. So the people I was working with decided we needed to present this to the people who can make a difference. And And I was really impressed at the way we delivered these, our findings at a British Geriatric Society. So these are consultants and doctors who are running the show. And the older people that I was working with got up themselves and told them about the issues that they had found, the problems that there were in getting to appointments at, say, 9 o'clock in the morning when buses don't start down there, and then the connections don't happen. And they actually made a difference because instead of me standing up and delivering, oh, this is what our research found, older people saying, these are the issues that we have to deal with. The geriatricians in the local hospital said, well, we need to deliver peripatetic services down on the Llyn Peninsula instead of expecting everyone to come to us. So that power and empowerment of older people being able to use data and sound data that will convince people in the hierarchy, as it were, to make those changes, really to me was changed the way I really approached research. So whereas Claire had involved people in research design and capturing data, taking it that further step to be able to give that to people to make changes themselves, while at the same time being involved in research that develops skills so that community organisations can continue to do work that is driven by them, was really important to me. I left North Wales at Bangor University and took up a job in Swansea University to start a new centre, the Centre for Innovative Ageing. So I was director down there. We developed that. It was a faculty centre. And then from there, I became director of the Centre for Ageing and Dementia Research, which was a Pan-Wales centre. And that involved 3 universities at Bangor University, Swansea and Cardiff. Our disciplines ranged right from the genetics of dementia through psychology, sociology, environmental work, and through to policy. So we had a big transdisciplinary team, and all of our research there involved older people. Wow. So the things that I'd learned through that work, I really wanted a new adventure. So I just established an Institute for Creative Ageing Industries in Wales through the last bit of European funding we thought we could get our hands on. And then I was offered a job over in New Zealand and came over here.
Wow. So, life's a journey. It sounds like your research has been a journey.
It has, and it's not just influenced by that co-creation with people I've worked with on research, but in 2000, I think 14, 15, my mum had dementia herself. And to see the journey of someone with dementia and the issues faced by people with dementia also changed the way I approach research. She passed away in 2019, just before I moved to Aotearoa. But some of the things that we encountered as a carer to my mum, she moved in and we lived with her and took care of her until that became a 24-hour constant vigilance. And unfortunately, my mum had to go into residential care because she needed round-the-clock care that we couldn't deliver because we actually needed to get some sleep sometimes as well. But those issues that we had to encounter, and having at that point done research for 25 years and thinking, why do I not know these challenges? Why is it not featuring in research? Really sort of underscore this need to include and listen to people who are experiencing these things to understand what the research questions need to be. So based on that experience with my mum, who faced continence challenges, and I looked for sort of support and research out there to say, well, what can we do? How do we approach this in the best way for my mum and for us as caregivers? There was so little out there. I was shocked. And I was also shocked that having done research in this field for so long, I knew nothing about that association between dementia and incontinence. So we established a group of older people living with dementia experiencing incontinence issues and caregivers back in the UK who set out a new research agenda. But together we came up with a new research agenda of what needs to change. that eventually got published after I moved to New Zealand, but as underpinned a piece of research here. So we're working with older people living with dementia and their caregivers to look at those services that are here that to support people in that situation. We have people in Auckland, the North region really of Aotearoa, but also Māori communities down in Hawke's Bay and a Pacific community we're working with too, to understand those experiences in this context. And in terms of co-creation, at the end of our project, we're going to co-create guidelines, say this is what the people experiencing this believe need to change because compared to what is actually happening on the field. Co-creating some resources for those caregivers to support them in that situation, and co-creating some core outcome sets. Now, these are things that are important to people that are experiencing incontinence and dementia, and the things we should be measuring future interventions about. So instead of focusing on clinical indicators like reduction of wet episodes, that's a typical one. We focus on things that are important to people like dignity, like privacy, and those become a set of indicators we measure all future research against in terms of efficacy.
It's, just before I ask my next question, can I ask you, was Mum proud of the work you're doing and doing still?
Well, before we became caregivers for my mum, she was really proud of the work I did in terms of aging and working with older people. But my focus had really been on some topics that perhaps were not so important to her.
Gotcha.
So loneliness. I did a lot of work around loneliness and family relationships. And my mum wasn't lonely and had great family relationships. So in terms of the impact on potentially on her life, it wouldn't have been as dramatic as the future research. By the point at which I'd switched that focus to thinking these are key things that need to work for people living with dementia and caregivers, Mum was no longer lucid enough to know that the research had changed that direction. However, I believe she would be proud.
Yeah. And, because you shared a bit about your story leaving school at 16 and every parent hopes the best. And I just wonder if she kind of sat you down and said, go you.
Yes, she did. I actually, she did set me off in the career to North Wales because I had a job in a hospital, which at the time were jobs for life, and I decided to change to a fixed term contract as a researcher. I thought my dad would be the one, go for it. Yeah, go and get a career. But my dad was going, oh no, you should stay in a secure job. And my mum was going, no, go for it. Go for it. So
That's awesome.
she was glad that, and of course my inaugural lecturer as a professor, both of them were there for that. And, they were proud of that.
Wicked. That's awesome. So we're in the community today, which I think is beautiful because we're maybe just lifting the lid on what people might think research is: an office, a lecture theatre, in our minds, on paper, on presentations, but we're talking to people. We're in the community. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of today and just help those who aren't here, just paint a picture?
Yeah, this is absolutely key to the Centre for Co-Created Ageing Research. We haven't set up our centre with a set of strategic priorities. This is the research we're going to do and it's going to look like this. Our first year is about establishing relationships with communities and listening to what we need to do, what they would like us to do, what are those priorities for research. So in the same way, I suppose about the project I talked about in North Wales and rural wide and working with older people, we went to that remote rural community and said, what are the issues here? What do you want research on? Because what evidence do you need to make change that will be benefit of this community? And that's what I see our journey in this first year we're doing right now, is to come out to communities and say, what do you want to change? What evidence would you like that can help us deliver impact? Or what can we produce at the end of our research that is useful to the community? And I think here, particularly working with the group that Ray's established here, that focus on olderpreneurship and work and retirement and income is really valuable. Olderpreneurs is a phrase that's been picked up elsewhere. I don't think it's used so often in Aotearoa, but it's an area that really is neglected. And Ray is actually picking up on that very nicely. But we know that, for example, in the US, the majority of startups are by people over 50 plus, yet the focus has always been in these entrepreneurial activities on younger generations. And to me, it just speaks of that ageism that is quite pervasive through society, that people get to a certain age and we think we know what their roles and their lives are going to be like. Whereas actually, there are a lot of people who have business ideas or businesses already that need to change the way they deliver what they're doing and could do with some skills and ideas around that. We were talking to a member of the community that Ray supported in there who mentioned just now about he needed some skills to change to online marketing. And what struck me was some of the work we did in the Heads of the Valleys, which are the old mining communities in Wales, came up with exactly the same thing. Wow. We went out to these communities to talk about work and retirement, and there were people out there who were doing all sorts of businesses but didn't know how to sell online, like using Etsy or other marketplaces online, and just being able to provide facilities and a place where they could learn how to do that changed their businesses in a way that meant they were sustainable and made them more money actually at the end of the day.
That's awesome.
But we needed to explore that with the communities before we came to conclusions as to what would work and what wouldn't work.
We could talk all day, but I'm aware that you've got important mahi, some work to do today. I feel slightly awkward asking this final question, but we'll do it anyway. If you were thinking about something that would leave a positive impact in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it's a bit crystal ball-y and maybe slightly conflicting because you're a researcher, but what would you hope for if someone was to watch this video and see some of the outcomes that you hope for from your work?
I hope I'm going to, you obviously gather I want to make an impact on society. I want our research to have an impact, but I'm going to focus here, I think, on what would like to see the centre influence within the university. It's obviously got to be applied. It's got to have an impact on communities. But I would like to see academia and academics move away from this focus on a single discipline, on their research track record and what the next project looks like, to focus on transdisciplinarity, connecting all the parts and people of the jigsaw that's needed to make change. And that transdisciplinarity includes connecting to the people that they are doing research on and changing that to doing research with, involving them. So for me, if we can change that approach at the end of the time we have funded as a centre, that would be success, because that success would also mark that impact in communities as well. So I think that's what I'd like to see. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ness. Appreciate it.
Thank you.